Hello, this is Ryder Richards. Welcome to Boots on the Ground. Today, I'm talking to Brandon Cain. Now, we're going to be talking about things like what turns a restaurant into a destination. Is it the food, the atmosphere, or maybe something more fundamental, like its physical place, its space in the community? So when we're talking to Brandon Cain, we're going to talk about real estate decisions and how these things shape not just a restaurant's bottom line or its survival, but maybe even its soul. I know that's a little bit cheesy, but we're going to kind of jump into some of these things. So Brandon, welcome to the show.
Hey, Ryder, how you doing? Thanks for having me.
Brandon, do you want to give us a breakdown of your position now, where you're at, and then a little bit of history about how you came into real estate?
Yeah, so right now I hang my license with Retail Specialists in Birmingham, amazing firm, great group to be with, an amazing team. We also have Retail Strategies, which is really the secret sauce to what we do. That's a whole nother show talking about those guys, but they're really amazing in what they do with the municipalities and just the way that they navigate the really hard, terrain sometimes in real estate and dealing with, just federal governments, state governments, and things like that. So those guys are pretty amazing. I'm on the brokerage side. I do, the typical lease ups, land deals, kind of a generalist, somewhat in the retail space. And then my background is 31 years in restaurants. I was a classically trained chef, did some time in New Orleans, New York, and then back in Birmingham. Owned quite a few restaurants in my day, still to this day own two restaurants, and I have a franchise company that I'm a part owner of. And we have three locations on the franchise world, getting ready for a fourth. So I still deal with the restaurant world and dabble into it, but my day to day is 100% real estate.
Nice. I think this is a perfect position to talk about this kind of the blend between real estate and restaurants, right? And this, there's something about everyone having a favorite restaurant and they love it and it's great and they're so passionate about it. And then sometimes things happen and the restaurant can't sustain itself. So, there's challenges, to say the least, in running a restaurant. And so some of those are what we're going to be talking about today, and maybe even how choosing that real estate helps. I think we were talking earlier about how real estate costs can really cascade through every aspect of the operations for a restaurant.
Definitely.
From the atmosphere to strange concerns about safety or parking or something like that. But
Definitely.
I think to start with, what if we talked a little bit about how restaurants cluster together? I noticed that there's this tendency for a lot of retail to bind together. So what are your thoughts on that? Should someone who wants a restaurant go where there's already restaurants?
Yeah, so I'm a big believer, and then the answer is yes. Because a lot of that, especially if you're an emerging brand and you're trying to get, your brand out there and get exposure, if nobody knows who you are or what your brand is, they're not going to come see you. So the idea of kind of, the co-tenancy aspect of being in a strip center with other brands that are already made it or, or doing their thing, that you're going to catch their customers coming to their restaurants. They're going to see you as a new restaurant and they're going to at least give you that try, right? And that's the key, right? So once you get them in the door, you're 100% on your own at that point, right? So you get to you get the luxury of having them come in because another restaurant maybe brought them to the center. You get them in your doors, you have a chance to win their business. You have a chance to win with the food, is what we say a lot of times. The atmosphere, the environment, the service, all of those things matter from the moment, honestly, you pull into the parking lot, right? Like, is the parking lot clean? Is it well lit? Is it safe? Do I feel like I can walk, a block away to this place, or do I need to be somewhere really close? Those things play hugely in the beginning aspect of that. But having these national brands that do their due diligence in real estate and understand this is not just about a location. There's a whole lot of things that happen in these locations. I think being able to get a spot for your new restaurant next to brands that have already did that work for you is invaluable.
Well, I guess the other side of that is it must be difficult for somebody starting out, just because I would assume that those are higher priced locations.
Yeah, they are. And that's usually what happens, especially in the mom and pop world, right? The single users, the people that are just creating a single restaurant. what most people don't realize, just for the economics of a restaurant alone, a mom and pop could be 1 or 2 bad weeks away from closing, right? So you have to be really smart, going to your point about how important real estate is and how it reverberate all the way through the process. If your rent is out of whack for what your numbers are, right? Most restaurants need to be anywhere from 6 to 8%. Uh, their rent needs to be that of their revenue. And most people don't even have a clue towards that, right? A lot of people just say, oh, well, that's the market. That's what we have to pay to be in that spot. But that's the importance in doing a business plan, really understanding how many butts do I need to get in seats to pay the bills, price point for everything that we offer here, then correlate that with your real estate, i.e. your lease term, what the rate is per square foot. And can you even afford to do that in your price range, right? So if let's say you're a hot dog stand, well, you're definitely not going to go to a $40 square foot place because you can't sell enough hot dogs to justify that in the beginning. Now, don't get me wrong. If you're a Danny Meyer of the world and Shake Shack is all of a sudden now doing a hot dog stand, there's a lot that goes into that because of who he is and the marketing machine that he has behind him. And quite frankly, he's a genius in real estate and restaurants anyway. So, I think sometimes where the mom and pops can get in trouble is trying to compare themselves to bigger brands and not really understand what all comes with that. So most of the time you see the locals and the mom and pops or the one-offs, we look for what we call opportunity zones. And in those opportunity zones, you might get better rent, but then some of the things we talked about earlier, as far as safety, parking, lighting, building, atmosphere around you, co-tenancy, you'll see a lot of times, and even in my own experience, we opened my first restaurant, Saul's Soul Kitchen in Avondale, which was edgy, and for chefs, we've always kind of been trained to look for the edgy markets with, you look for the art studios, you look for the music halls, you look for things that, that cultural feel, right? Like you're trying to kind of band together and think, okay, can we build our own entertainment area like a band of thieves together, right? You got your punk rock, firehouse shelter that's doing amazing music. You got a brewery that just opened. What are we missing? We're missing food, right? So we're trying to build a community, which is what a developer does all day long, right? And working in this amazing place at Retail Specialists, these guys have teams that do all these things and plan these communities. So, but for the mom and pops or the one-offs or the single chefs, we have no clue about any of that, right? We're trying to figure out, how do we make amazing food? How do we price it? How do we pay our bills? How do we hire people? Half the time, we don't even really pay attention that there's parking or not because we can't afford, these certain areas. So then all of a sudden you start interacting with the other business owners on the block per se, and you start building your own kind of planned community together, right? And you make a lot of mistakes and you have some wins. No doubt. There's definitely some wins, but there's definitely more losses sometimes than wins, which honestly just shows you need to be using a professional real estate professional to help you with these things. But, a lot of things too with restaurant guys, we don't even understand that brokers don't get paid from us, right? Like we think, everybody is a fee. So if there's a broker helping me find a spot, we're always scared of that. Like, oh my God, now I got to pay somebody. Just the realization that we work for you and we get paid most of the time on the landlord side is something that most restaurateurs just don't know, especially the young, not quite so savvy and experienced ones, including myself in the beginning. I was very guilty of that same mistake. I think once you understand what a professional can do for you, which is what I'm doing right now in my role, is trying to educate the clientele on what we can do and what we can bring to them to just help their success.
There's something about being an artist, and you're talking about this atmosphere and trying to get into these places where you can build your own community. There's a DIY aspect to when you're really talented in a certain area, being a chef or whatever it is, or being in a band, then you're going to gravitate toward places you can afford. And the idea would be that you're going to want to do it yourself. And it is hard to sort of think that a professional would give you their help. And this is coming from my background in doing arts and gallery things, is that Everything needed to be DIY. But one of the things about that is when you would enter these, like you're talking about Avondale being an edgier place,
Yeah.
there's sort of a vibe there. There's already an atmosphere there. And one of the things that we've talked about before offline was third places, right? So
Definitely.
how do you find a third place? How do you create one? What are they? And I guess the term originated with Ray Oldenburg back in the late 80s, early 90s. But it's this idea of having a restaurant, coffee shop, someplace you can go. And atmosphere is important. It has to be accessible. It needs to be diverse. There needs to be some sort of feeling of a home away from home there. So it's not work,
Definitely.
it's not home, but it's something else in between. And so when you're talking about these things, it feels like you're doing the thing of you're scouting all the positions out and trying to see if maybe there's already atmosphere you can tap into, especially for the mom and pop side.
Yeah. I would say this on the mom and pop side, especially a lot of times we don't even know, you know what I mean? We're just trying to, a lot of times it's your first business, your first restaurant. For us in Avondale, to use that example, the brewery and the park became a catalyst for us. So we knew the brewery was going to be a major player in the community. They had bought a lot of the buildings in the community. So we knew, there was a plan somewhat of trying to build something in there. Then couple that with the city had, committed, I think $1.2 million to Avondale Park to, refresh it, to add some amenities to it, to clean it up, frankly, and make it a fun and usable green space, right? So when you have those two catalysts, also you're butted up against Forest Park, which is a very affluent neighborhood in Birmingham. It's like, okay, you feel like when you see those things, you have a chance to kind of get people to come. And then the brewery's going to work because everybody, especially then when breweries were popping up everywhere, the big courtyards, the fun meeting space, the third space became breweries very quickly. It could be a Tuesday afternoon, it's 70 degrees outside and sunny. The brewery's going to have a crowd, right? And so you see those things when you're spotting your locations. You understand that, okay, the brewery is going to be the catalyst. It's going to bring people. We have the park at the other end of the street. We have this amazing music venue and even one that we used to have before that's no longer there, Bottle Tree. So you kind of know these areas and you just start connecting the dots in your brain, right? Like it's saying, okay, well, there's an entertainment venue there. There's a brewery there. Food is what's missing, right? So that's where the restaurateur, if you're savvy enough and you're not scared, which again, to be honest, I was a little scared that first year because we were coming into an area that was, very high crime, frankly, kind of been forgotten over the years and fits the stereotype of over the tracks, right? Like on the other side of the tracks, there's a well-known housing community that a lot of crimes have happened over the years. And I think some of the older generation have been taught to kind of not go there. So not only do we have to, create something in a space that's less desirable, we have to now affect the psychology of people of what they've been told, sometimes multi-generational. You don't go to that side of town, right? So you have to create an excitement. And I think for us in the restaurant, the food was that excitement, right? Like, me being a classically trained chef, working in a local restaurant and making my name in the city, kind of gave a little validity to the project. I think people got behind the fact that if I was going to leave fine dining to do a barbecue place and I'm leaving Southside at the time was pretty prominent area for the restaurant scene. Now the city has grown into downtown and everything else. But back then, Southside was, Frank Stitt, the empire of Frank Stitt lives in Southside, right? Chris Hastings was there. George at Ocean was where I worked at for 7 years. So it didn't make sense to a lot of people. But I actually really love the idea of using that as leverage because when people can't figure something out, they got questions, right? And the questions led you to me. And then for me, my answer always was come and see me and eat the food and find out for yourself, right? So a lot of word of mouth. You got to understand how to be a marketing person. I think a lot of that marketing is just really not being scared to get out there in front of it and own what the space is and know that we're going to have challenges, but we're going to work together and we're going to make an amazing area, which fast forward before COVID, we were one of the best, districts in the city. And we had just got voted one of the hippest towns in America in Garden and Gun a few years earlier. So we made some good traction.
It's great. I like the idea too that you sort of used curiosity, right? You were doing something novel. And that also led to this kind of adventure aspect. There's
Hmm.
this idea of sort of destination tourism and, this idea that you're going to get out of your bubble and do something a little exciting, go to that edgy
Exactly.
Avondale neighborhood. Right? All of a sudden, this starts to become a little bit cool, kind of in a
Yeah,
punk or
definitely.
rebellious kind of way.
And I will say we leaned heavily into that, and a lot of that was because we lacked resources, right? I mean,
Mhm.
if you don't have enough money to spend that marketing ad and really push it, well, then you got to get creative, right? And then you got to hope you have personalities in your group, which I have been dubbed the personality guy in my group over the years. You hit TV, you hit radio, you do events, you just promote, promote, promote. That was our secret sauce to get it started.
Yeah. Well, let's go back to the real estate just a little bit too and talk about because you opened in Avondale, probably while the rents weren't quite as high because it hadn't
Hmm.
didn't have as much of an established reputation, then were you able to do more interesting things with the restaurant?
Yeah, I mean, again, going into it, you're building your business plan, and for us in this particular example, we weren't real savvy on real estate. We knew, we were in an area that was an opportunity zone, and we had to be creative. But for us, we were looking for low rents because when you're building your business plan, the thing that people don't realize about restaurants, there's only one revenue stream. It's you. It's the customer, right? Like that's the only way we make money, and the only way we pay the light bill, the water bill, the gas bill, all comes from you. So when people look at, let's say, a burger, and they're thinking, why does that burger cost, XYZ when I can go to the Piggly Wiggly or Kroger's or wherever down the street, buy the same meat, do the same thing? Well, you're not wrong, depending on, the type of meat that we're getting, whether we're grinding it ourselves or we have our own cows, which we don't, but, for argument's sake, for the chefs in the world, because the big argument is this Wagyu beef steak, you can't go buy at the store. So I get that. We're not talking about that. We're trying to stay more apples to apples on this. But the idea is that the reason it costs so much more is because that's the revenue stream to pay for rent, payroll, power, all the bills we talked about, the cool hats that you guys love, the shirts you love, the glassware, the silverware, everything. So there's only one spot to get that from. So for us, you try to be strategic. You try to kind of space that across your menu, right? So like a perfect example is when you do menu price increases. What you have to do twice a year, honestly, for inflation. That's the Chick-fil-A model. Those guys have always been on us, mom and pops, to really pay attention to inflation because a lot of times we get caught up in trying to undercut the other guy, right? Like, oh, if his burger's $6, I'm going to give you the same burger for $5.50. I think that's a big problem in the restaurant space. That we kind of think that way. I think at some point, like any other business, you just have to charge what it costs, right? And food is one of those things that kind of back to that subject of you can go to the store and buy the same burger. There's not a lot of other industries out there where that's the case, right? So you have to really pay attention to those things. And if let's say you need to get a $2 increase on your menu, where you're going to spread that across, and it's going to be 10 cents on this. Maybe my biggest thing that sells will bump a quarter, and you got to be strategic in bumping in those ways, right? And then because nobody wants to see a $6 burger add on. It was $6 yesterday, and now it's 12. Like that's how you
Yeah.
kill your business. But all of that matters because the rent, right? I mean,
Hmm.
if your rent's high and that's an overhead cost that you can't adjust, you can't fix that. You can't let me cut the lights off on rent for today and we're not going to open.
Hmm.
You need to be open every single day that you can because every day you're not open, you're not making money.
And speaking of being open and making money and having one revenue stream, I mean, I've heard too that there's quantity quality, like
Hmm.
finding a balance between those two. How many people can you get in? What is the dining experience like? Is a longer dining experience take money out of your pocket? Do you have to charge more for it? Just things like that.
I'll tell you a thing that most casual diners wouldn't expect. The fine dining restaurants, most of them don't make money
Mm.
because it costs so much, right? Because you got linen costs, you got napkin costs, you got 6 pieces of silverware that's got to get swapped out constantly. You got 4 different glasses that have to happen. And you also have to still hit a price point that people don't feel gouged, right? Like, and so it's a really fine balance. And I'm, professionally fine dining chef my whole career. I got into the barbecue and pizza because I finally woke up and realized there was no money in fine dining after I spent a buttload of money building a fine dining restaurant and being the chef of it.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of time, man, a lot of times those places are all about the chef's ego. And again, I'll raise my hand. I've had that ego. I've been there, and you start thinking about art, food as art, and trying to be creative, because really you're trying to provide value to the customer, right? Like a steak is a steak is a steak. Well, in our fine dining spot, we slice it this way. We source it from this place. We bring these amazing ingredients in. We flew in overnight. It's about the story more in fine dining, right? Like the food has to be great, and that's kind of the underlying understood agreement between you and the customer, right? Is like, we know the food's going to be great, but there's a lot of places that have great food. Where do you win? Well, that's where the ambiance comes in, right? That's where the beautiful bar comes in, the beautiful drinks menus, the amazing staff that you have from the front door to the busboy, right? Like, I mean, everybody in the fine dining world has to be on point, professional, friendly, clean, and not seen, obviously, unless you need to be seen, right? And that's the real trick to fine dining. Now you get into the fast casual world, you're taking a step down, not in quality of food, but service and ambiance can change, right? And depending on what you want to do, we've all been to those greasy spoon dive bars that maybe in the worst neighborhood, maybe a little shady, but has the best patty melt you've ever had in your life. And the cook doesn't show up till midnight, right? So you got to go get that burger at least at midnight, and it might be 2 a.m. So that's where the food can drive you into those things. But even that, I mean, with the casual side, you still can get great service. The challenge there becomes just trying to find staff, right? That gets the idea, because there is a little bit of, I want to be in the fine dining world as a server because, it's a percentage thing, right? You're trying to get tips, and your check average is going to be higher. So they're all going to gravitate towards that as servers, and rightfully so. I get it. This is how they make their living. So then when you get into the fast casual spots, the training aspect kicks in so much harder, because you're probably not dealing with as much of a sophisticated employee that has that kind of pedigree, that worked for the bigger names, that groomed them in a way. So then you got to consistency, systems, and training is really what the difference is. I think in a great fast casual spot, even QSR, if you want to throw Chick-fil-A out there, I mean, everybody knows chicken's good, but the service is better, right? It's my pleasure. I mean, the things they do are so just fine-tuned and calculated down to the way they say thank you, and those are the little things that make a business what it is.
Yeah, I think we'd previously touched on COVID, and all of a sudden there's this distance that comes in between the service, and all of a sudden there's technology that started to fill that gap. And I think post-pandemic, having somebody be thankful and nice to you and interacting in person all of a sudden took on this new charm.
It totally did.
Yeah, definitely recognize that more.
Tip culture got a little out of hand after COVID, I feel like also. I mean, I get it. I'm part of the business, and tip culture has been there as long as we've been there. But when you start going to the car wash and there's a guy there putting your credit card in the slot for you, and then they say, "Oh, it's going to ask you a question." Well, you already know what that's asking, right? It's like, why am I tipping the car wash guy who's taking my card out of my hand and swiping it in for me? Well, I don't need that. But people got creative with that. And I think people, like, as they tend to do, maybe got a little carried away with it. And I'd say too, in COVID, I feel like people were over generous, right? People were over tipping. They wanted you to be there. It was very the spirit of, you're going to make it through. And I think people just tried to capitalize on it afterwards. And can I keep the goodwill going and keep the tips in? And I think at some point people get fed up, right? You feel gouged, you feel taken advantage of.
Right. And that changes your behavior patterns, right?
Completely.
So all of a sudden you don't want to go to places where somebody's going to expect a 25% tip, or somebody's going to, or you start hitting no on that screen, and then somebody glares at you. And so, the whole thing.
Or even worse, you get the Uber Eat guy who knows that he didn't get tipped before the food ever came and doesn't bring your food. I mean, it's a slippery slope. It really is. Technology can be great, and it can also get a little out of hand too.
Yeah. And going back to the COVID thing too, certain spaces survived, and we were saying that maybe some of that had to do with their location. Like there was some
Yeah, I
adaptable use there. And
think
we were
so.
talking about flexibility before we came on to record. Do you have any examples or thoughts on how your real estate can help you sustain something, some sort of crisis that would show up?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, depending on the crisis, COVID is the example we're using now. I think places that had outdoor seating
Mm.
really had a big advantage. You know, for our spot in Avondale, we literally made a walk-up window. We just busted a hole in the wall, put a window in it, and we served that way. And it gave us an opportunity to be efficient in what we were doing, right? Because in the beginning, you're trying to get through a door in and out, and a table's there, and how do we do this? How do we not have contact? And finally, I just took a sledgehammer and knocked out some bricks and said, "Let's build a window here, and we'll put a screen up for whatever protection we needed." And then it became a thing. It became a thing for the neighborhood. People would come to the window, and it was funny, actually. We were having to warn people to socially distance, right? Because they were gathering at the window or in the alleyway slash patio area, which again, we took an alley, put tables and chairs in it, and now we had outdoor seating, right? So we spaced them out and things like that. But that became a place where people came and gathered, right? They got their cocktails from us through the window. They got their food. And in the beginning, I think people were going home, but then it just, people started yearning for, contact, right? And to be around other people. And there was a point where we had close to 40 people out there in masks, socially distancing, kind of having a good time. And we would not have been able to do that without the window, and definitely not without that alleyway, which who would have thought an alleyway could turn into something amazing, right? And we still use it as a patio to this day. We move things out when people got to go up and down there, but we put ballasts in. We invested in turning that into a space for us because honestly, at that point, you either pivot or you die, right? I mean, it
Right.
was it was all about necessity and what we had to do.
Yeah, and there's something about being open to not only change, which
Yeah.
is always going to be showing up anyway, uh, but that sort of DIY adaptability again,
Hmm.
busting out the hole in the window, taking advantage of the land around you and the space around you, but maybe also listening to people like with your revenue
Yeah.
source. If they're going to hang out and they want to be out there, providing that space. And I know this might sound interesting, but having a judgment-free zone, right? Like,
No, listen, you hit that on the head. There was, especially during that time, there was a lot of judgment going on, But again, for us, it's one of those things like you have to survive, right? Like, I mean, I think the ugly truth about business sometimes that people don't want to hear, especially in the hospitality world, is you open a business to make money, right? And I think that's sometimes going to have a four-letter word type of connotation to it of how dare you, right? But that's why you open a business. Now, the business we open is the hospitality business, and we want to make an amazing place, an amazing environment, amazing third space, if you will, in that. And I think the people that are really good at that make money and create that space, and nobody pays attention because they're having such a great time because the food, the atmosphere, the environment, the service all hit key
mhm.
points. I think
Yeah,
that's the big secret.
there's a economist idea of the invisible hand in the art
Yeah,
world, right? That the
yeah,
the artists are going to come in and they're going to do all the work anyway
hmm,
because they're passionate. And
exactly right.
so there is something about you make that place and no one recognizes. They know they want to be there, but they don't see the invisible work that goes in.
Hmm.
Just like you're saying with good staff, in some occasions they sort of become invisible a little bit. And so people
Yeah.
just get the experience of the sort of joy or pleasure or sociality from it without sort of having any interruptions. It sounds like a
Hmm.
very difficult balance to maintain.
It is. It really is. I mean, to your point in the art world, I mean, how many people have looked at art and been like, what's that? I could do
Yeah.
that. But they have no clue that how many layers and textures and techniques that went into this to create what seems simple.
Yeah.
It's really super complex, right? And to me, as a chef, that was always the goal, right? Like, how could we do things in the fine dining world that I could make that looked super unassuming, wasn't a big deal, and you took a bite and your mind just went crazy? Like, how could this possibly be?
Right.
That's the fun in it, right? That's the idea of you don't understand what went into it, that it took us 3 days to make this dish in prep and everything we had to do. we execute and send it to you in 15, 20 minutes if you're lucky, depending on how busy we are. And you have this amazing meal and experience that, you couldn't reproduce at home if you're not trained this way. So I think that says a lot for the artist, honestly.
Yeah. When you have this vision or whatever it might be, this inspiration to make this kind of dish, do you build the concept and look for the location based around that? Or do they affect each other somehow? Is it a
Yeah.
confluence of things?
I mean, yeah, it's a bunch of different things that go into it, right? Depending on, I think first and foremost, you're trying to identify a location. If we take finances out, right, just for this part of the conversation, you want to go somewhere where you have a network where people know who you are, right? Because you need that exposure. And then, I mean, you want to be in a place where the clientele or the neighborhood itself eats the food that you're going to provide, right? I mean, there's a ton of examples out there, and I don't want to name names because I know the whole world's listening to us here, but people that have put amazing restaurants or amazing chefs in the wrong place, and the neighborhoods revolt, right? They don't want that, right? I mean, I've personally seen a handful of times in New Orleans where an amazing fine dining restaurant pops into a neighborhood and a year later it's gone, and a greasy spoon came in and killed it for the next 2 decades, right? And it's because they listened to what the neighborhood wanted, right? And I think a lot of times that's where the real estate professional can come in and knows these certain things that, if I'm a passionate chef and a restaurateur and I want to open a business, all I'm really thinking about is how can I get there? How can I afford it? And how quick can I get up there? Right. So the idea of that, having a real estate professional there takes the burden of trying to navigate through the landscape, right? And understanding that, hey, maybe we don't do this crazy Thai place in a super German area where they really want XYZ, right? So, and understanding those things and just understanding the market, I think is where a real estate professional really comes through, because that's their life. That's their profession. Their duty, their job is to know the market, to know everything around it, flip the rocks, if you will, to see what there is there for you. So you can then take that information and make the best possible decision you can. Because location, 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 I know it's a catchphrase and it's corny. It's super true, and that's a thing that a lot of people don't realize.
I get this feeling sometimes, right? I get passionate about what I'm doing, and
Hmm.
my passion can sort of blind me. Like I could go into the wrong location just because I'm so excited to get started.
Yeah, patience is extremely, extremely important. And again, I think that's the real key to having a real estate professional that isn't attached to it, right? Like that passion, because your network is all behind you. Everybody that's involved in that restaurant or that project is behind you, and everybody wants to see it succeed, right? And we know at some point, every day I'm not open, I'm losing money, right? You're that between permits, between fees, between everything that goes into this, not to mention construction costs, that money gets eaten always faster than you think it does. And it always takes 3 times longer than you think it does. So to me, that's why location and patience is so important, because if you went through all that quickly and then you realize when it's too late that you're in the wrong spot and you just spent, let's say, $500,000, well, you're in trouble,
Yeah, you
and
are.
now next thing you know, like you're just another statistics in the restaurant world of part of the 80% failure rate. And I think a lot of that rate is driven by people not knowing how to make the proper decisions in real estate, because we all think we can do it. We all think that it's not that big of a deal. Oh, I know this great spot. Well, that building's been empty for 6 years. There's a reason it's been empty for 6 years. But if you just saw the building yesterday for the first time, you have no clue.
Yeah.
And to me, and again, obviously I'm in this real estate world, and even for me, every day, my eyes are open to decisions and mistakes I made. And I'm deemed a successful restaurateur and operator. I made plenty of mistakes on the real estate side because I was a little arrogant, and a little too confident in my own skills to know that I could ask for help. And then also, to the point we made earlier, I thought I had to pay for that. You know what I mean? And you're
Yeah.
pinching your pennies, and you start wearing a lot of different hats when you're an owner of something, and to save them, to save the money. So I think that understanding is probably helping my career more so than anybody else in the restaurant scene right now, because I'm educating my friend. I'm educating my fellow chefs, my fellow restaurateurs, and letting them know, especially the guys that maybe had worked for Frank or another big name for a handful of years and they feel like it's their time. Nobody tells you this stuff, right? I mean, because the moment you leave Frank or George or Chris or whoever, technically you're competition now. And it doesn't really behoove me to help you other than my connection to you, right? But you got to be savvy and you got to realize, the moment you leave those doors, you're technically an enemy. I mean, it's a little harsh, but it's the reality, especially in a town like Birmingham. Our population is not huge. We're all fighting for the same butts and seats. The same diner is all our diner. And that gets, as more restaurants come, competition gets harder and real estate matters that much more.
Yeah. Well, Brandon, thank you so much for coming on. This has been a great conversation, very enlightening. And of course, we need to point people to the website so they can find you. Yeah. But on our way out, do you have any last thoughts?
I think the biggest thing is contact a real estate professional when you're in the markets looking for things and utilize their service and know that they truly are on your side, and your vision can be their vision. And we want to see dreams come true.